All right, what is happening? We are here for another book learning episode. And today we're going to talk about. There, you're not blinded. Think Like a Freak by Stephen Levitt and Stephen Dubner. One's a V, one's a PH. I think that's why they use their middle initials. Stephen D. Levitt and Stephen J. Dubner. I'm a PH myself, but I go by Steve, largely because people couldn't figure out Stephen with a PH. It's a little too tough. Anyway, I'm already rambling. So we're going to talk about Think Like a Freak, which is a fantastic book, and I'm sure you can all learn a ton from. So let's get right into it. So here we are with the book and a small, shameless plug of my brand. Remember that I quit my job to help you quit yours. But to do that, it's going to require a different way of thinking. And while this may not be a business book that we're talking about today, it certainly shows us another way of thinking. And I think anyone who wants to change the normal way of doing things can benefit from it. In case you don't know, these guys initially became famous from their book called Freakonomics. Steve and Stephen, or Stephen and Stephen, however we should say it, are economists, and they use copious amounts of research and data to argue correlation and causation of certain events that go directly against intuition, common knowledge, and media hype, right? They prove stuff wrong, basically. Maybe that's not how they would like to describe themselves, but the fact of the matter is they show some awesome proofs, basically, of very interesting occurrences and phenomena. So, in the opening of this book, they basically say that once they wrote Freakonomics, the fans sent in a flood of questions that they could probably never answer. I mean, in their entire lifetimes, right? So instead of trying to do that, they thought it would be more useful to write a book that would help each of us see into their thought process and maybe be able to answer some of the craziest questions for ourselves. Okay? With that little introduction, let's take a look at an awesome quote from Levitt that will help you start to see how he thinks. Morality, it could be argued, represents the way that people would like the world to work, whereas economics represents how it actually does work. And this quote reminds me of something I heard about Amazon's Jeff Bezos. He's like CEO of Amazon, right? One of the biggest companies in the world now. So he's famous for being a seeker of truth. He doesn't like rules. He doesn't like assumptions. He doesn't even care about being right. He cares about the truth. And these guys use economics to find the truth, not the convenient answer. And I'm a big fan of that. I love challenging conventional ways of thinking and finding better ways of doing things. Alrighty. So let's jump into the golden nuggets we'll be looking at from this book. First, we'll talk about what it means to think like a freak. Oh, look at this. It's out of order. And because I practice what I preach, I'm not going to restart this, guys. Perfectionism can't help anybody. We are going to talk about the 3 words I don't know. But we're also going to talk about what it means to think like a freak. Okay? And lastly, we're going to talk about why we should and how we can think more like a child. All right? Look at this. Now we're back in order. First, what does it mean to think like a freak? Although we can all learn a ton from reading, and that's why I make these videos, I want to encourage you all to read and learn more and better yourselves, right? That's what I'm trying to do. But there are so many questions out there that we can't rely on books or anyone else to answer them for us. We need to learn how to think for ourselves. If only school had taught us, how to think instead of how to follow rules. But don't get me going on that. Okay. So if you want to think like a freak, one of the most important things you need to understand is incentive. And the book gives a fantastic example of how powerful incentives are. The example is that of a penalty kick in soccer, or football, if you live anywhere but the United States. So a PK is when the ball is placed just 11 meters from the goal, and a kicker faces off with the keeper, one-on-one, mano a mano. Now, the overall odds of success for the kicker is 75%, pretty darn high, right? Because more people are right-handed, or right-footed as it may be, the left corner is considered the stronger side. So, what does that mean? Keepers go left 50% of the time, and they go right 41% of the time. If the keeper, by the way, if the keeper guesses wrong, because they're jumping, right, one way or the other, if the keeper guesses wrong, the odds of the kicker being successful go up to 90%. So that's pretty damn high, right? All right, as it turns out, kicking the ball right down the middle is 7% more likely to succeed than either left or right. But kickers only do this 17% of the time overall. So why is this? Now, there's a few arguments. You could argue that, if the player did this all the time, if the kickers always kicked it down the middle, keepers would just stand still and stop the kick easily. So kickers need to have some variety. Also, it's possible that a keeper jumping one way or the other could still stop the ball down the center with his foot. Okay. But the real reason that kickers do this so infrequently comes down to incentives and the fear of shame. If the kicker has a 75% chance of being a hero and winning the game for his team, those are already pretty good odds. 3 out of 4 times, right? If the kicker makes a fantastic save, let's say, then that's the 25%. Okay, too bad for the kicker, but he did his best, right? If he wanted to increase his odds by 7%, he could kick it down the middle. But if the keeper, for some bizarre reason, stood still and just caught the ball fired right at him, the kicker would look like a complete moron, and everyone would hate him. Okay? So in this example, the interests of the kicker are aligned, mostly, with the interests of the team and the fans, but not completely. The kicker would still prefer a loss if it meant that he wouldn't be ridiculed and shamed for making a bozo move. Okay? So here's what I take away from this example. If I can't, for whatever reason, understand why someone is doing something or behaving a certain way, I know that the reason is incentive. I may not understand the incentive. In fact, he may not understand it either. But for some reason, he thinks it's in his best interest to do that. So, the biggest takeaway from this is to actively align your interests with those around you. So everyone is incentivized to accomplish the same goal or mission or whatever you're trying to do. This is why I am such a fan of business partnerships, commissions, employee ownership, stock, all that kind of stuff. Because if you want people to behave in the best interests of your company, then make the company's best interests the same as them. So simple, it's revolutionary, right? Okay, so that's a huge takeaway. Take that right now. Check. Good. Now, let's look at why I don't know are the 3 hardest words in the English language. Not I love you, like many people think. And this is, of course, just arguing what the Stevens are talking about, okay? So to illustrate this, I'm going to read a simple story from the book, and then I'll ask you a few questions about it. Ready? Okay. A little girl named Mary goes to the beach with her mother and brother. They drive there in a red car. At the beach, they swim, eat some ice cream, play in the sand, and have sandwiches for lunch. Okay. So ready for the questions? The questions are, what color was the car? Did they have fish and chips for lunch? Did they listen to music in the car? And did they drink lemonade with lunch? Okay, did you get them all? Give you a second. All right, answer to the first one, it was a red car. Boom. And they had sandwiches for lunch. So, no on number 2. But what about number 3 and number 4? Well, here's the kicker. There wasn't enough information to accurately answer these. The fact is though you probably answered yes or no to number 3 and number 4. I know I did. And that's because we like to think we know all the answers. We've got them all, right? We've been trained to know everything, to extrapolate, to guesstimate, to, let's face it, to bullshit our way through everything. I remember in school thinking how smart I was because I could BS my way right through stuff. Unfortunately, this is why our culture is so full of it. If you also answered yes or no, don't be hard on yourself, but take a mental note to be okay with saying, I don't know next time. Because unless you don't know anything, you can't really ever learn anything. All right. Trust me, I'm preaching to the choir, if that's the right saying there. I am taking this to heart as well. All right. The book talks about how useful it can be to think like a child when it comes to solving very difficult adult problems. It all starts with how curious kids are. Even as simple and annoying as a kid who says, why, why, over and over and over again. This may seem, well, childish, but just because you're unwilling to finally say, I don't know, doesn't mean it's the kid's fault. Right? Bringing it back around here. So the next reason it can be good to think like a child is just pure idea generation. As long as you can separate good ideas from bad ones, the more ideas the merrier, right? The Stevens say, to separate the bad ideas, by the way, use a cooling off period. So don't just act on any ideas right away. They all seem brilliant when you first think of them. But sleep on it and you may decide otherwise. And if you do this, then you're not quite as afraid of acting on some really idiotic idea. So then the idea generation just comes, brainstorm, throw everything out there and see what sticks. Finally, to think like a freak, they say to think small. So people love thinking big, but they argue that that's largely because it's an exercise in imprecision and speculation, and people love speculating, right? Without anything on the line, people they always got an opinion, right? Opinions are like assholes. My dad told me everybody's got one. So they say to think small because often small problems are ignored by others, so you can learn a lot. There's just stuff that hasn't been worked on or discovered, and there's a lot that you can learn there. They say big problems are basically just a mess of small problems, so you can make a ton more progress by just tackling one of the small ones. And finally, because change is so hard for people, it's easier to have a real impact on a small problem than a big one. All right, let's wrap up with an exercise. As usual. And I want you to all answer these questions in the comments, okay? Interact so that these points really stick with you. Number 1, how would you take the PK? Would you go for the odds and then try to defend yourself later? Or would you just rather take the easy way out? Number 2, how did you do on the I don't know quiz? Were you willing to say I don't know to number 3 and number 4, or did you kind of try to imagine the answer, and try to extrapolate like I did on number 3 and 4? And finally, number 3, should we think big or small? Of course, there's probably value to both. Just weigh in on the way that they talk about it and kind of what you think about it. All right? So, I hope you take a ton away from this lesson. This is an awesome book. I look forward to hearing your comments on it. Go read this book right now, and I will see you next time.